It can often seem a little overwhelming to confront this system of racism that we're living in. But last week, Michelle Mercer and I got into a conversation about how we can affect change within our circles in order to make the changes that we'd like to see. We also got into talking about a lot of other things that I think you will find pretty interesting. Michelle is a business strategy coach, and so she brought a little bit of her expertise to our conversation. If you haven't had a chance to listen to that conversation, I invite you to do so, but not before we get into this conversation with Eliza VanCort. Welcome to Diversity Dish, where we're dishing on everything diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice related. My name is Sedruola Maruska, and we're bridging the gap between what needs to be said and what needs to be heard. Those individual experiences that are often ignored or simply dismissed. Sometimes I'm dining alone, sometimes I'm dining with friends, and sometimes I'm dining a la carte. No matter how I'm dining, it promises to be delicious. Let's dig in. Eliza VanCort is an in-demand consultant, speaker, and writer on communications, career, and workplace issues, and women's empowerment. The founder of the Actors Workshop of Ithaca, she is also a Cook House Fellow at Cornell University, an advisory board member of the Performing Arts for Social Change, a Diversity Crew partner, and a member of Govern for America's League of Innovators. Her first book, A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space, publishes on May 11th, 2021. For your opportunity to win a copy of her book, be sure to listen to this interview to the very end. And now, Eliza VanCort. Hello, Eliza. How are you?
I am so excited to be on your show, Sedruola. Thank you so much for having me.
It is absolutely my pleasure. I am excited to have you here as well. I was really excited when you said yes, and I started getting notifications about, when you're going to be on, and here we are. So,
Yay!
thank you. So before we get into all of the heavier stuff that we tend to talk about here on Diversity Dish, I would like for you to introduce yourself to the audience by telling us something about yourself that not very many people know.
Let me think. Wow, there's a lot of stuff a lot of people don't know. Well, I guess two things would be, although I just did put this on my bio yesterday, but until no one reads Goodreads. So I'm a complete sci-fi nerd. Absolutely the worst sci-fi nerd ever. I actually think we might be in the Matrix. I mean, not really, but I do suspect. And I also have almost every word to West Side Story memorized. I guess those are two fun facts.
Really? Yes. I love it. I love West Side Story. And I often say things that relate to the Matrix, like, once it's like being in the Matrix. Once you can't go back.
That's right. I say the same thing. I always say, you know what? The Nebuchadnezzar is dirty and gritty, but it is real. And it's real. And that is, for me, the better place to be, even though sometimes you want to be replugged in, but you can't go back.
You can't go back. You can't go back. Once you've seen, you can't unsee.
That's right.
That's just how it goes. So I love that. Awesome. Well, we're going to talk a little bit. I know that you have a book coming out. The title is the Women's Guide for Claiming Space. Is that the correct title?
Almost. It's A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space. Stand tall, raise your voice, be heard.
Love it. Tell us just a little bit about your book as well.
The book is about claiming space, and it came about because of my childhood and because of actually being hit in the head with a car while riding my bike, which we can talk about at some point. Wow. While I was recovering, because I lost a lot of my ability to communicate after my head injury, I started researching and watching people and watching myself, and I realized that women who really stepped into their power. I was looking kind of for a magic bullet to help me figure out how to recover. And I realized there was no magic bullet, as is often with life. Nothing is that simple. But I noticed that women who had 5 things that they really were mindful about tended to be able to claim space, and they just had better lives. And so that those 5 things create the 5 pillars of my book and the 5 parts of my book. And it's really about claiming space, and claiming space is simply living your life unapologetically and bravely. And that's what it's about, is learning concrete tools to do just that.
I love that. And why, is there a particular reason why you care about women claiming space?
Well, I think we all go about things from our own experience. So I would like to say there's some, really high reason why I love talking about women. But the truth is, I am a woman. My friends are women, and I experience things that men do not. And I am fascinated by why is one group treated one way and one group treated differently, and how does that impact them, and how can they mitigate that? And as an acting teacher for 20 years, I saw the impact of what it is like to be a white woman who experiences this, or a brown or black woman, or a white man, and just the different ways people communicate because of that, because of how they're treated. And for me, it's just fascinating. So the book, of course, is from the experiences of research, but also my sisters. And when I say sisters, I mean the tribe of women that I love in my life, and my own experiences. And I think often we write, obviously, from our own experience.
Yeah, I think that we can't help but write from our own experience. I know when I've been studying about, building a business and that sort of thing, it's always like, well, who's your avatar? And I think to myself, well, I'm my avatar. Like, yes. I can only speak from my position, right? With the things that I've, very clearly experienced, and be able to share that with other people. I read your article about authenticity. I think you wrote an article that was like, I think it was Don't Be Authentic, but I think it was on LinkedIn. And it was very interesting to me, because what you talked about was how true authenticity can only actually comes from a position of power. So if you are in a position of power, you can be truly authentic, but the person that may not hold the same power as you may not be able to be as authentic, because they have other things to consider and to think about in being authentic. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I thought it was such an interesting perspective.
Yeah, well, this actually came about because I had a boyfriend who would say these things that just blew my mind. And the answer that we're going to call him Chad, just because I don't like that name, and I feel like calling him Chad. And I want to protect.
Chad is good.
And I also want to protect his identity, because that would not be nice. But he was a white man with a lot of power, and he would often say, "Well, that's just how I feel. That's just how I feel." And I started thinking about it, and I thought, wow, there are very few people who can say whatever they feel all the time. And what I talk about, I don't know if it's not about not being authentic, but it's the privilege of sharing your feelings. I am sure and I don't want to put my experience on you, but I'm going to guess that as a Black woman, if you went around sharing every feeling you had, it might not go over well, because you're not.
It might not go over very well at all. You're right about that.
Exactly.
And that's why I found the article so interesting, because I thought to myself, well, I'm as authentic as I can be. And depending on the situation that I'm in, how authentic can I be without necessarily causing myself harm? Right?
That's right.
How authentic can I be without causing those that I love harm, or being labeled something? Right? Now, I'm getting less and less concerned with the labels that are put on me, because I realize that some of these labels are simply put on as soon as I walk into a room. Doesn't matter if I open my mouth or not.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But hearing that authenticity being fully authentic, or like you said, being able to just fully say what you want to say and how you feel in any situation, is not everyone's
No.
reality.
No, I mean, that's a very few people get to do that. That's one little minority of the population, which is white men. Literally, they're probably the people who can do it the most. I mean, it's interesting what you say when you walk in a room, because my dear friend, Dr. Nia Nunn, told a story about how her student says when she walks in a room, her Blackness walks in first. And when I walk in a room, my womanhood walks in first, but not, so she's navigating all this other stuff. And obviously she can't say everything she wants because her Blackness walks in first, and she's going to deal with racism. But the other, I mean, I'll tell you do you have time for me to tell? I'd love to share a story.
Absolutely. Please share away. Okay. We have time.
So my favorite story about this comes, and I am very, very, very blessed in that I have the most incredible women in my life. And that has been probably one of the reasons why I have gotten through a lot of the things I've gotten through. So one of those women is Kim Munson-Burke, who is my Morpheus, if we're going to go to the Matrix.
Yes. And I did read that about you, about Kim, rather. You did write about Kim.
Yeah, Kim is amazing. And there was this moment, I remember we're all sitting around the table. There were maybe 2 white guys there. And then the rest of the people were people of color, white women. And we were talking about words, what words people like to be called, and how we should navigate that. And this white guy, who's actually a wonderful, wonderful human being, but in the moment he really misstepped. He said, well, I don't understand this. I mean, I don't understand why I have to be so worried about these words. Like, I just don't get it. Why? I mean, why do I have to think about these words all the time? And Kim, who's hilarious, when she gets upset, she sort of spreads out. And I know something's about to happen. She once said to me, oh, I do that because I'm trying to relax. I'm like, you do realize that looks terrifying, right? She kind of spreads out. And then she puts her hand up and she says, I got to stop you right there. And then she says, all of us, pointing to everyone who's not a white dude at the table, all of us spend all day navigating around you. We spend our whole day trying to figure out how to actually mitigate your experience and your feelings and making sure everything's okay with you, because you are usually in power. And now we're asking you not to say a few words, and you're having a hard time with that. And then she pauses and says, I think maybe you should examine that. But it's true, right? I think the less privilege you have, the less people tolerate you saying what you think, because you're dealing with more stuff, and you can't, if you said it, people are going to have reactions. And my feeling is white men really have to start realizing that they should not say anything they want, because not all of us can respond in kind. And so they need to start developing some awareness. And white women have to be aware when it comes to our brown and black sisters, that there are things that we can say that if they said it, they'd be an angry black woman. So, it's all about sort of understanding where you are in the privilege scale and making sure you're not just saying whatever you want just because you can.
Yes. There's something that I often tell people when I'm teaching or when I'm talking about racism, and that is that there is a color scale, and the whiter you are, the righter you are, right? And the darker you are, the more wrong you are. And so it goes by proximity. And so you have to understand the scale in order to understand the privilege that you hold within that scale, right? Because like you said, we can't all just say what we want to say.
Right.
And, I was talking to someone this week about something that was happening at work, and she was telling me about this situation that had happened. And I asked her, I said, is this girl black? She said, yes. So I was talking to a white friend, and I said, is she a dark-skinned black girl? She said, yes. I said, you have to understand that the reaction she's having may not just be to you. It may be to a lot of the layers, a lot of the pressures that are put on her because she is a dark-skinned woman. She has a lot of things that she navigates that you would never understand because of your proximity to the rightness, the whiteness. And then right there up at the top is the white male. And so so in order to be able to understand all these, you have to kind of step back and say, how is this affecting? You speak about communicating across in terms of anti-racist communication. You do speak about that, right? Tell us a little bit about how you navigate that kind of education when you're doing it.
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say, just going back to your last point, which I think is the foundational, is actually the idea that like you can't understand. And I think for me, that was the biggest stumbling block, because I like to understand stuff. And if I don't understand it, it's hard for me to believe it's real. If it's not happening to me, or I can't read about it and I can't really get it, it's not, which is ridiculous.
And I don't think that you're alone in that. And that's one of the things that we kind of fight against, right? All the time when in this sphere, in educating, is that, just because you can't understand it doesn't happen to you, doesn't mean it's not real.
That's right. And so, for me, that was a struggle. And I know I've made a lot of mistakes, especially years ago when I was kind of going through this process. I don't believe in being woke. I talk in my book about how that's ridiculous. I call it woking, because I think if you're a white person, you can't be like, and now I understand race completely. Like it's a lifetime, it's a lifetime journey.
Right. It's an active verb.
It's active. And in fact, one of my students came up with the phrase folk, which is faux and white, woke together. So, and he's like, don't be a folk white person. Actually, I'm sorry, they're non-binary. But in terms of the way I approach it, I always believe people should play to their strengths. My biggest strength is really, how do we communicate our emotional life? How do we move in space? And so I do, and how do we see the world? Because that's sort of the space I've been in throughout my life. And so I look at it in 3 parts. The first part is understanding that you have had privileges that you don't understand that you have. And that's the first thing. And I call that the metaphorical porch. And the reason why is the reason I came up with that phrase is I was biking once, and I had a neighbor, and I biked up to his house. Of course, I have leisure time. He's my neighbor. We're in this neighborhood, and it's predominantly white. It's predominantly professors in this small little college town I live in. And I said, hey, my daughter's applying to college. Can I talk to you about this? And he said, sure, I'm on admissions. Come on up. I sat on his porch. He talked to me for about an hour. I then told my daughter, and my daughter said, oh, they're house cleaners' daughters in my grade. And I said, well, you should encourage her to have her mom ask this person, we'll call him John, the same question. And this woman had never gone to college. Her daughter's first generation. She's a brown young woman. And so I asked Ella what had happened, my daughter, and she said, this is why she doesn't talk to teachers, because this is the kind of thing that happens to her all the time. And I guess the mother went up to this guy and said, my daughter's first gen, we don't know what to do. Do you have any advice? And he said, oh, absolutely. Yes. I'd love to help you. And then he said, it still makes me want to cry when I tell the story, but he said, tell your daughter to work very hard. And so that moment was like, oh, I got an hour of mentorship and I don't even need it as much. And they got one sentence.
Yeah.
They got one sentence. Work hard. And some people go through life getting one sentence.
Yeah.
And some people go through life getting hours after hour after hour on the metaphorical porch. And then we wonder why we're doing better, And so to me, I tell that story, and that's the first step. And then I go into actually the mechanics of communication. So how can you tell if you're power playing someone? How can you tell if someone's feeling they're being power played? Looking at body language. And I talk about all of this in my book. And then I end with giving, concrete phrasing that you can use so that you're not power playing people. And then the final thing I talk about is the cycle of failure, particularly if you're an employer, and rethinking that. Because often when we have people who don't come from our background, we assume that they have of information from their more metaphorical ports than we do. And so when they mess up, we just think they're being, quote, lazy, or they're being sloppy, or instead of, okay, I wonder what I didn't prepare them for. I wonder what they don't know. And then rethinking that and figuring out how to use failure as an opportunity for validation and growth rather than shaming. And so that's sort of that's very, very, very big outline of how I approach anti-racist work.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me, the response that you said that she received, because that response is the response that we get passed down all the time. Work
Mhm.
hard, work really hard. Even when you're already in a position at a job and you go in and you bite that bullet, you just get in there and you ask for what you want or what you need, and you are told, work hard, your time is coming, and you still watch people who come in after you go past you within the workforce. It is incredibly frustrating and infuriating.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's definitely something, like you said, it's like you don't see it until you do see it, then you can't unsee it, and now what do you do with it?
That's
I
right.
think sometimes people have a hard time with the now, well, what can I do? And then they just kind of let it go. It's like, well, I can't do
Mhm.
anything. They let their power go. They relinquish their power, they relinquish their privilege and say, that's just how it is.
Right.
So it's kind
Yeah.
of, I find that very, very interesting.
I mean, I think that if you truly do start to understand this, you can't say, whatever. I think people who say, whatever, don't actually understand it.
True.
And I think that it's that you have to get to this incredibly difficult and painful place of you don't know what you don't know, and
Yes.
being okay with that. And then the other thing that I have spoken with my friend Kim about is that when people who are white start to understand isms a little better, and they kind of go through this process of being, Kim calls it being asleep versus being awake, but, and I think you keep waking up, but you do kind of, I would say I was kind of in a coma before. I think
Yeah.
once you come out of that, I feel like I don't know a single person who's gone through that process who hasn't become really passionate about this. But what she says is people actually go through a process that is similar to a death, like the stages of grieving that you experience when someone dies, because you realize that the world you lived in that you thought was real is not really the world.
Right.
And you have to grieve that world and go through the pain of that. And I think that's why a lot of people go, because when they start to get to a level of understanding, they
Yes.
say, this is hard for
Hard.
me. And then they back up. And I saw that after George Floyd. And I've seen that so long that I kind of saw it coming. I
Yeah.
saw all people on the street and everybody was so engaged. And I do think there were a lot of people who have grown from that experience. But I thought, nope, I know a lot of people are going to step back. And my very kind of callous way of joking about it is I felt like a lot of my fellow white women sort of went, this is becoming quite hard for me. I think I'm going to go to Starbucks and just not, because it's hard for me. It's really hard for me to learn about what happens to you. So I think I'm going to not. And
yes.
I mean, I understand it because it's very painful. So while I'm poking fun, I do understand it, but it's not fair. It's not fair.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and it's often an argument. It's like, well, it's that in and of itself shows us your privilege. You can say, oh my gosh, this is so uncomfortable. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. Right. Whereas right, for those who can't see, she just flipped her hair, which is not flippable. But it's, it's that. And then it's like, I'm done. I'm just going to move on. And yet then get triggered or feel that knee-jerk reaction when someone points that out to them, or yes. When someone says, I thought you were doing this, or what happened to that? And they're like, I
I have a story about that. So that was one of my revelatory moments, just what you're describing. I was talking to a girlfriend and I don't even know what I was talking about. I probably blocked it out, but I said something kind of dumb and she was a Black woman and she goes, I got to stop you because you're being really white right now. And I went, no. Let me explain. No, you don't understand. No. And then she goes, I got to stop you because now you're being even whiter. And I was like, she said, And then she said, when a Black woman tries to tell you about her experience, your only job is to shut up and listen. That's your only job. And I just was like, it was one of those moments where I went, oh, and I've now used this example to explain it to white women. I'm like, well, when you try to explain something to a man and he doesn't get it and says it's in your head, how do you feel? Now you need to extrapolate. It's just the same principle. Just believe people.
Right. Believe people when they tell you, what's going on, what's happening. You talk about, I noticed, as I was trolling you, probably.
Call it Google stalking. I do it all the time.
I'm stalking you. But you talk about you used to want to make yourself small. Mm-hmm. And of course, this was because of your history, and I would like for you to explain that a little bit. But you used to want to make yourself small and hide from the world, but you realize that being small is dangerous. Mm-hmm. Right. And it makes you vulnerable, not invisible, because what you were trying to do was be invisible. So I heard that from you, and I would like for you to explain that context. But here's my other question for you. Mm-hmm. I'm a Black woman, mm-hmm. right? And as such, the world is always asking me to be small. Mm-hmm. What ideas or what thoughts do you have for me about not being able to walk in my shoes, but wanting to address all women in terms of mm-hmm. that smallness that, for me, that the world requires of me in order to think of me as okay, versus being who I am, being out and then being considered too much, too big, too loud, too mad, too all the things, too much.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing is, for me, as I said, my mother was paranoid schizophrenic, and when I was 4.5, she took me illegally from New York to Texas, and then twice from New York to California. And one of the times to California, we hitchhiked across the country by truck, from truck stop to truck stop to truck stop. And I have my own Me Too stories from that, hearing things happening to my mother. And I very quickly decided that the safest thing to do would be to be invisible. Yeah. And so little girls, of course, are taught to be invisible from the time we're little, put your toes together and smile and be nice and don't interrupt. And so when you're told to be invisible by the world, and then you've also experienced this thing where you felt like you had to be invisible, it's very hard to then undo that training. And it takes a long time. And in high school, I probably looked to most people like I had undone that training, but I was doing a lot of flirting and being cute and funny and self-deprecating, which isn't a bad thing, but I was doing it because I didn't feel like I could just say, no, it's this. And I don't need to make a joke or smile or be cute, or zany. Right. I can just say it's this. And I did that with my closest friends, but in groups, I definitely didn't. And it wasn't until my head injury where that changed. So for me, I think that's important. But I do think there's that other, obviously, there is a privilege to how much you can be in your power. And what I have seen is that every time we walk in a room, depending on who we are, it's different for everybody. We put ourselves on a scale. And on one side is complete emotional safety. And on the other is dire and total physical danger. And most of the time, we are not in that position, although I would say people of color experience dire physical danger. Unfortunately, they have a higher probability of experiencing that in their lives. But most of the time, we spend navigating the middle and trying to push ourselves toward emotional safety, because we're never very rarely do we feel 100% emotionally safe in a room. So when you figure out where your scale is, which we do, we just don't know we're doing it, then the question is, how safe am I to attack this head on? Or do I need to take a different route? And a great example of that is interruptions. So I have 2 approaches for interruptions. One I call Mortal Kombat, because as I told you in the beginning, I'm a sci-fi nerd. And that is just hitting it head on. That's just looking at someone and saying, you interrupted me. You've continuously been interrupting me. Stop. But of course, then we know what happens is they say, you're overreacting and angry and crazy. And then you say, oh, often what happens is it's, the thing happens, you call it out. The person says you're crazy and angry and whatever. You say sorry. And then they say, it's okay and forgive you. Then you walk away feeling bananas and they walk away learning absolutely nothing, right? Like rinse, repeat, right? So it's this like terrible cycle. So, so you might have to know that's where you're headed. And are you ready to make sure that you interrupt that? So it's like several choices. So, and that is going to be different for everyone. Then the other kind of interruption technique is a way in which you do it that you actually build allyship while you're doing it, and you visually cue the person and you do it several times so that by the time they interrupt you for the fourth time, you've built allyship, or you've made them so aware that you've sort of by social capital earned it. And you can say, whoa, I just tried these other three things. And then you've done this a fourth time. So what I try to do when I'm working with people is understand that what works for me is not necessarily going to work for you, and make sure that I honor that and talk about alternatives to how do we do this? Do we build an ally? Do we build allyship? Do we try a different technique that it will be safer for us? I mean, using the most horrific example, if I'm pulled over by a police officer and they are disrespectful to me, I'm going to be able to do a lot more in terms of saying, hey, you can't talk to me that way. My life is not in danger. Mm-hmm. And I would never tell a Black woman to respond as I would, because it could be life and death for her. So we have to understand. And that's one of the things that actually drives me bananas about most communication coaching is it's usually someone who's like, everyone should do this thing. And I'm like, really? Because we all aren't received the same way. So that makes zero sense.
Yeah, exactly. Because we can be as outspoken or as, we have ideas, we're smart, we can do things and we have these capabilities, but we always have to kind of go roundabout the bush, roundabout. It's always a longer process for us to be able to step into our power, so to speak. I mean, if we look at women, like, let's take Stacey Abrams, for example. Mm-hmm. If you were to ever sit down with Stacey Abrams, now seeing her and the power she wields and the things that she can accomplish right now, she will tell you that along the way, she had to go through a lot of shit to get there. A lot more than most people would ever have to go through in order to reach that level of respect that she has garnered. So yeah, you're right. It just takes, it's a roundabout.
Yeah. And communication is not one size fits all. And, whenever I hear someone say, oh, my communication coach said everyone should, I'm like, run. It should not be. Another great example is our vice president in the debate. My phone blew up because she actually looked as if she was acting out something I teach all the time. But, when she put her hand up and said, Mr. Vice President, I'm speaking. If she had been Elizabeth Warren, she would not have had to smile at him. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But she knew exactly what would happen if she didn't. Mm-hmm. And so she added that smile in order to give that message of, you can't accuse me of being aggressive or angry. Mm-hmm. And that was smart. That was a very good move on her part, but it wasn't fair that she had to do that. She should be able to show her anger and say, stop with the interruptions,
Right. So, and that kind of brings us to this kind of idea that emotions are only for certain people. Only certain people are allowed to have and to express emotion. When people are marching because people are dying in the streets, Black men are getting killed by police officers and for no reason, and people sleeping in their beds are getting shot up by the police and not getting ambulances called for them, and people are mad, that's a problem. But when people storm the Capitol, try to take over the government, actually try to kill the vice president and the vice president-elect, that's exercising your rights. Like
Yeah. That was like a white privilege fest. That was insane. That was just like, we get to do anything.
and I thought to myself, if people cannot see it here, they're just not going to see it. But everyone is at a different level of understanding. And I get that. And I just want it to not be like that. I want it to be where people just accelerate their learning.
Yeah, I mean, the funniest thing that was going all over the news was that I'm sure you saw that woman who they said,
Oh
"So what
my
are
gosh.
you doing here?" And she's like, "My name is blah blah blah. I'm from blah blah blah," and da da da. And they're like, "Yes, it's a revolution. Like, why are you? It's a revolution." And I'm like, "Girl, what did you think was gonna happen? It's a revolution. You should have blood on you. Like what? Like, but what was hardening about that is that I do think that came from some consciousness raising this summer, is that there were white people who were like, okay, that's one bridge too far. Like that was, that's a little crazy. So,
Right,
and I don't
right.
know if people would have put that together before. I just don't.
You have to wonder. Thankfully, there's more and more information out there, more and more information being shared. But yes, you have to wonder. So I would like to pivot just a little bit. You wrote a book and you want it to be for all women, right? And not just self-identified feminists, and I think that these were kind of your words. When we talk about feminism or we talk about feminists, I often want to stop people and say, wait. There are different feminisms, and we need to differentiate what you're talking about. And so, would you talk to what you mean by not the self-identified feminists? And also, would you touch upon white feminism? Because that is something that I've shared with people, but I would like for you to talk about it from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I think is that I personally believe that every human should be a feminist, and so I'm going to start with that and then pivot to what you're saying.
Okay.
The woman who did Wonder Woman says, of course I'm a feminist, because if I'm not a feminist, I'm a sexist. And
right.
and then Maya Angelou has that great one. I'm a feminist. I've been a woman my whole life. It would be ridiculous or something to that effect for me not to be on my own side. So
Yeah.
so I think that's important. But the problem is twofold. For a lot of white women, that word has been used to shut up women. If you're a feminist, then there's an association that you hate men, and there's all this wonderful stuff that they've put around that part to make women go, oh, no, I'm not a feminist, but I believe in equal rights. I'm not a feminist, but, and it's a great way. If you tell people the word that really defines looking for your rights makes you angry and hating men and all these things, that's a great way to stop people from looking for their rights. So that's the first thing. The other piece of that, of course, is that the white feminist movement has a history of white supremacy. And we have been advancing our own agenda at the expense of our sisters, and in the best case of scenarios, without a thought about our brown and black sisters, but often it's at their expense. And so for me, I always say I'm an intersectional feminist. Audre Lorde has that great saying that, we don't live single issue lives. So we can't possibly, so much of feminism is like, when a woman this, with no thought that, you're really saying a white woman. That's what you're saying.
Right.
And so for me, that was really important. There's actually, my daughter has this saying on her wall in college, and I hope I'm pronouncing her name right, but there's a woman named Flavia, I think it's Dzon, Dzoddan, and she says, my feminism will be intersectional or it will be bullshit.
Exactly.
And that's basically what I think. My feminism will be intersectional or it will be bullshit.
It will be bullshit. Right. And I agree with that. I think that I just saw something today. Someone posted something today anyway, I saw it that said that Black women have never fought for only their rights without regard to what is needed racially societally, right?
Right.
So during the suffrage movement, when they were sidelined from the white women's suffrage movement, it was because they weren't only talking about let's get the vote for Black women or women. They were saying, but we also have to address these issues in the Black community. So they've never only fought for the Black woman, they've always fought for the community. And so, I thought it was important that kind of be talked about, in that we have to realize that a lot of times when we're talking about these things, when we're fighting for these things, if it's not intersectional, it's bullshit, because there's so much that needs to be taken into consideration. And I find that maybe companies think it's just too hard to be equitable, because there are different things to be taken into consideration. It's too hard to be equitable, when in reality, you flip the hair again.
So hard for me.
It's too hard.
So hard for me that it's hard for you.
For me, yes. But in reality, there are things that can be put into place that are not that hard. Mentoring programs are not that hard. Bringing someone in and making them feel a part of the team should not be that hard, but it is.
But it is. And I actually think it shouldn't be, but we do so little education in this country. I mean, I actually just wrote an article about that, which I'm hoping to put out soon, which is about why I don't like Women's History Month. And I actually don't like Black History Month. And I don't like all of those things. And it's not that I don't think they shouldn't be, because I think they should be now, but they should never have to be. And the reason
they should never have to be stopped. They should always be ongoing. Everything.
Exactly.
It's not just, because what it does is it fragments history.
That's right.
So it says that, this history here happened, but it's not as important as the overarching history that you're going to learn about, that's going to center the white man and the colonizer and all of that.
That's right.
This little thing here happened. No, it's all interweaved. So this should all be all the time.
Right. It should be every day should be women's history. Every day should be Black history. This country was built on the backs of Black people. I mean, it's just but what that does is everyone's like, well, you're 50% of the population, so you get 1/12. Congratulations. And you Black people, you also get 1/12. Be so happy. And it's like, no. Then you're let everyone off the hook for the other 11 months of the year. And, same with queer history. I mean, that is part of our culture, and we should have that integrated. And I think, one of the things I was talking about in this thing is, why are we not, for example, talking about Middle Passage and what that was? Most people don't even touch on that. And yet, I've lost family in the Holocaust, so I'm not trying to in any way degrade what happened in the Holocaust, because it was atrocious. But when we're talking about American history, we often talk about the Holocaust, which was in Europe, and we talk about all the people who died. All of this stuff is absolutely valid. We should take the model we use for the Holocaust and we should apply it to Middle Passage. We should apply what happened, because just that trauma alone explains so much. And we just don't. We don't talk about the fact, we talk about these great men who do these millionaire things. I was just researching this, and it's all these millionaires were happening, and everybody's applauding these great entrepreneurial men, when women, the moment they were married, lost all ability to have any financial power whatsoever and couldn't have done that if they wanted. And why are we not talking about that? And why are we not talking about some of these men built their fortunes because they were selling enslaved people? So it's like all of these things to me, it's not history what we teach. We teach propaganda, and what we teach is what to value. And what we value is a very specific model of what success means, and who and why it happened, and what we should actually uphold as important. To me, the oral history of a slave is just as important as what bill was passed that year by people in Congress. It's part, or else you're basically what you're saying. I'm going to rant about this, but it just annoys me so much. But what you're basically saying is all those people didn't exist.
Yes.
We're invisible. until suddenly we could actually participate in commerce, which is insane to me. Insane.
Right. Yeah. And which is why I get so incensed when people say things like, well, why don't they just move out of that neighborhood? Or why don't they just, well, why, if I can do it, why can't they get that job? Because when we get into that job, then you're questioning how we got into that job, right? I've always known as a Black woman, as a Black person, that I needed to be 10 times better than the next person in order to get the same job. I've always known that. That's something that we're told incessantly growing up. We're told that because it's how things work. And even if you still get that job, someone in there is thinking, oh, that's affirmative action. Oh, we had to lower our standards. Oh, so what is the standard? What is the standard based on? There's so many things that we say and that we think that we don't realize simply centers whiteness. To lower our standards, what are we lowering our standards from and for what and why? If you think about it, you have to say in your mind, you have to say, oh, well, I think that the standard is white men. Therefore, I feel that we had to lower our standards in order to. And if you can confront that, right? If you can confront that, maybe then you'll realize that you are in the matrix and you need to get out.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think that that is absolutely 100% true. And people but it's very, very, very hard. It's hard because you have to then suddenly go, oh, you mean I got some advantages here? And it's hard to self-reflect on that and realize that. And it's painful sometimes, but we have to do it.
It is. It's true. And I say that too. People have to dismantle the system that is benefiting them, that they've never realized was benefiting them, and that they think that they're fighting against, but they're not.
Yes. I mean, one of the interesting things about Women's History Month or Black History Month is I noticed a lot, particularly with Women's History Month, that they highlight when a woman has stepped into a male arena and succeeded. And that is revered, oh, she's a CEO or she's a this. And, I was thinking, my daughter this summer, I've read Angela Davis's work and I thought I knew Angela Davis. And then my daughter, who is really, really committed to anti-racism and working on immigration, all these things in college, she's kind of her passion. She called me and she said, Mom, have you ever seen Angela Davis's talk from jail? And I went, no, I mean, I think I've heard of it. She said, you've never seen that, Mom? And I said, So she's like, oh, this is just an outrage. And she sent it to me and I watched it. Yeah. And it basically deconstructs. I mean, these people, she's in jail being interrogated and she goes into professorial mode and schools these people on race and violence and all the intersection of all of these things and oppression. And I'm thinking, this should be right up there with some of the most famous orations in our nation's history. And I did not know it existed because we don't highlight people who are working to dismantle oppression. We highlight people who are working within the system of oppression who are succeeding.
Say it again, sister. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. And I often think about that. I'm like, so, and then if you think about it, it's like, oh, she's the first woman to do this. Well, did she do that because she was absolutely head and shoulders above everyone else, like exceptional? Or was she given the space to do that? Right? Was Jackie Robinson the first because he was above and beyond all those other players who were in the Black, the Negro Baseball League, the Black Baseball League? Or was he simply the first given the space and the opportunity to do that? Yeah. It's incredible to me that people think that the first of anything is, oh my gosh. And I am not diminishing anybody's
of course not.
achievements. But what I'm saying is that person, behind that person, or just in the same kind of line as that person are hundreds of others who were simply dismissed because they didn't look, speak, or have connection or whatever it was to get to that place. They didn't get
Absolutely.
that space.
It's
right.
And it's just so prolific. I mean, it's just everywhere. It permeates every part of our society. I do mentoring. I'm a Cookhouse Fellow at Cornell, and before the pandemic, I did a lot of mentoring of young women. They'd come to you're supposed to go out and do like paintball, but I don't do stuff like that. I was like, no, can we just have them come to my kitchen? Can I use my budget for cheese and crackers? Right. So they all came to my house and I became very close with them, a lot of them. And so one of my groups, my favorite, we still have a thread. They named it Convos in the Kitchen. And they're mine, but they're actually in my book. But one of the things that I have noticed also is, it's all about these, connection versus connection to connection to connection to connection. And if you have those connections, you just take it for granted that that's the way it is. Yeah. You don't understand that is literally what is propelling you. Yeah. And for me, I know, especially because of actually my teaching acting, that I have a vast network. And I know that I probably wouldn't be sitting here with you right now if I didn't have that vast network, because there were about 8 degrees of separation. They got me in touch with somebody who could help me with this. They got me, to do my book, and all of those things. And if you don't have any of that, you are at a distinct disadvantage. One of my most heartbreaking stories is I go to MIT every year and I work with kids who, well, I say they're kids because I'm old, but they're young people. I still call my kids kids, and they're like, yeah. I work with young people, and they are first geners and young people of color. And I often end up mentoring one of them and leaving, having connected with one of them. And one of the people told me, this is somebody, I got to be really careful not to give away any detail, but he is a young brown man. He is from a background that I won't tell a story, but if I told it to you, you wouldn't believe it was true. It's so challenging. And one of those schools, 0 kids, go to an Ivy League ever. So obviously it is he reminds me of the kid, in Good Will Hunting, just this sort of like brain that just blows your mind open. Every day he says to me, people say, you must feel so lucky to be here. Every day he hears, you're so lucky to be here. And I said to him, we'll call him John, that's my catch-all name. But I said, John, they're lucky to be here. They were born, they won the parent lottery. They were born into a situation where they had every advantage. You are not lucky to be there. You are there because of hard work. They're lucky to be there. And he said, I know that in my head, but when you hear it every single day in and day out, it starts to get to you. And if he didn't have me, I have been helping him with like cover letters and things like that. NYU is one of the best programs out there to support people who are coming in who are not the typical white privileged kid. And yet he's still, they can't possibly help every kid with every cover letter. And the disadvantage that he would have had if he hadn't had just happened upon me is, and it's not that I'm doing anything special, I'm literally doing something that like every parent with privilege does, but he doesn't have parents literally that are around. So he doesn't have that option. And so the world would have lost his voice just because of little things like what he wears to an interview, and it's so grossly unfair. It's so grossly unfair. And I think until we change that as a society, we are losing so much brain power that could be out there making the world better and innovating. And that's what really kills me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that a lot of incredible humans are being lost to systems that are not built for them because they've never been thought of as being part of it. I asked in my group, I said, what is legacy to you? What do you consider legacy? And I got a few answers. And then I told the story of my friend. She's watching Antiques Roadshow. And I said, ever notice how all those people are always white? All of the people who are always finding these things or who have had these things passed down to them. And now they're saying, oh, this is $50,000, worth $50,000. And this is worth it. This woman was on there and the 3 vases and the crate that they were in all came up to about $250,000 worth of value. And the thought was legacy. And also, when you think about these Ivy League schools, they have legacies, right? They have students who go in there because their parents were there and their great grandparents and their grandparents, right? It doesn't matter if they're the worst student on the block. Oh, they're in no matter what, right? And yet, a Black or brown student gets in there after having been told you have to be 10 times better. And they are, and they get in there and they're still looked at as they took our spot. We lowered the bar. What did they do? Affirmative action and that sort of thing. So you're right. That privilege that is invisible to so many, it permeates everything. It permeates so much.
I actually have an answer to that now. When people say affirmative action is terrible for colleges, I say, you're right, it is. It is absolutely horrible because it's just so unfair that there's an entire group of people who are in a special pile who get lowered standards just because their family has been there for several generations and gave money to the school. And that's just completely unfair. And that is, we really need to stop that because they're taking the spots of people who really worked hard to get there. That's my answer. Because that is the most affirmative action that happens in the colleges.
Yeah, right? I'm gonna borrow that one.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Please, everyone can take it.
Oh my goodness. So we've talked a lot about a lot of different things. Is there anything that you would like to talk about that we have not touched upon, but that you would like to bring out right now? This is your moment.
Yeah. I just like this conversation so much. I guess the one thing I do is important to me to say is that when I tried to get this book out there, I got a lot of pushback from people because the last 1/5 of the book is about race and isms and calling out white women to make sure that we're not participating in white feminism. And what I heard a lot from people was, but this is a book about women. And I was like, yes, indeed, true. That is why there is this entire part of the book, because it is indeed about women. And I think that what I'm hoping will happen with this book is that people will purchase it and they will tell their friends about it, and it will send a message actually to publishers that until we start doing books that are truly intersectional, like we're cordoning off people into these categories, and every book should be integrated for all women. And so if you read this book and you like it, please, even if you don't buy it, even if your friend gives you the copy, tell a friend about it so they put a review up and say, I loved this, that we did this, because I did some radical things, and not radical, but I did some things in the book that aren't typical for this kind of book. It starts out really basically. We talk about posture and voice. We move into, anti-mentors, and then we move into micro, and we kind of keep going, and we keep building and building and building, working toward the Nebuchadnezzar throughout the book. But at the end of the book, the last chapter of the last part, I actually hand the book over. And that's one of the things I'm most proud about and I hope actually at some point, maybe we can talk after the show. I want to get these young women out there, and I want their voices to be heard. But the Convos in the Kitchen young women that I talked to you about, yes. I messaged them and I said, if there's one thing you could say to white women, what would you say? And I got this wonderful text thread, and it was so good that I asked my friend, Dr. Nia Nunn, I kind of want to just put them at the end of the book. Is that crazy? And she said, no, you have to centralize their voice. That's what this part is about. You can't end on you. And so I asked them, is it okay if I use your words at the end and not edited, just hand the last part over to you? And they said yes. And so the book ends with their insights, which are so brilliant and wonderful and heartfelt. And there are two things I'm really proud about with that. The first thing is I think we need more books that centralize young voices, because we, unfortunately, until you're quote accomplished, you can't get in a book, which means the voices of young people are invisible and they are not able to claim space. And young people have a lot of important things to say. So that was one of my first, my goals, is to get a young, fresh voice, and because they are the experts, right, of their experience. And then the other thing was that they're young women of color. So I wanted to centralize young Black and brown women. And I hope when people read this, it will help shift their idea of what feminism is, and open the possibility that, as I say in the book, if we can look at feminism from the perspective of when we rise together, we rise so much higher. Or 50% of the population, that would be completely transformative. And I think for me, that's sort of the last thing that I would want to say, is we have to rise together. That's the only way we're going to do this.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm looking forward to reading your book for sure. I will also have all of your links and information down below in the show notes for this podcast. And yes, you can tell me all of the information, the extra information for these young women that you would like me to put in the show notes. I would gladly do that as well, because I do believe that more people's voices need to be centered, because more perspectives are needed. I'm all about equity, and equity cannot happen when you have only one perspective, right? It's kind of like you're looking at that box with the 6 or the 9. You're standing over here and here, and one's like 6, one says it's 9. Who's right? They're both right, but it just depends on your perspective, right? It depends on how you're looking at it. It depends on how you're processing it through your upbringing, your cultural perspective, so many things. And having more perspectives means more creativity. I think that it just means so much more for everyone when everyone's voice is there.
Yeah. And I really appreciate you sharing your space with me. This was really wonderful. And I always learn something every time I'm on one of these podcasts. So I really appreciate that as well.
It's absolutely my pleasure. So I have a question that I ask all my guests before they leave. And because this is Diversity Dish, and we've been dishing a lot on a lot of things, but I would like to know, what is your favorite dish?
Oh, that's a tough one. I'm Italian. I'm half Italian. We don't mess around with our carbohydrates. You know what I'm saying? What is my favorite dish? Well, I am a chocoholic, so there's that. But I think, I love that. Boy, I have so many. That's a tough one. I think I'll go with my most sentimental dish, which is that my mom would have these periods of sanity when she was in the hospital, when she was on her meds before she left, but she was stabilized. And on the phone once, she taught me our secret gnocchi recipe.
Oh.
And it's Italian gnocchi. It's ricotta, which is really the best way to do it. And and she taught me the secret way to get the sauce to stick onto the gnocchi. And whenever I make gnocchi, I think of her. So good gnocchi.
Yes.
Good gnocchi. That's the way to go.
I love it. Sounds delish.
It is.
Well, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on Diversity Dish today. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Did you enjoy that episode? If so, please remember to download, rate, review, and share. It's the only way that the word is going to get out. If you'd like to be entered to win a copy of Eliza's book, A Woman's Guide to Claiming Space, go to the Facebook group Dishing on Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and enter below the image there. You can also enter via Instagram under Diversity Dish, and the image that you'll find there also about the contest. Looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.